The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning, slipped under my apartment door like a death sentence written in legal jargon. 72 hours to vacate. My name is Selin Morrison, and if you think you know how this story ends, you're wrong. The paper trembled in my hands as I read the reason for eviction. Non-payment of rent for 3 consecutive months. 3 months. The same 3 months that Marcus Caldwell, my ex-boyfriend and the father of the child growing inside me, had promised. He was handling the rent while I dealt with severe morning sickness that kept me bedridden most days. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I called him immediately, my fingers shaking as I dialed his number. It went straight to voicemail. The same voicemail I'd been hearing for 2 weeks now, ever since he'd stopped returning my calls about doctor's appointments and baby preparations. The recording played in his smooth, confident voice. "You've reached Marcus. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." But he wouldn't get back to me. He hadn't gotten back to me since the day I'd shown him the ultrasound picture, and watched his face drain of color. The apartment felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in as reality settled around me like a heavy blanket. I was 19 weeks pregnant, unemployed due to complications, and about to be homeless. The man who had whispered promises about building a family together had vanished the moment those promises required action instead of words. I sank onto the couch we'd picked out together, running my hand over the fabric he'd insisted would be perfect for when the baby comes. The irony tasted bitter in my mouth. When the baby comes, there might not be anywhere for the baby to come to. My phone buzzed with a text from my landlord, Mr. Patterson. "Miss Morrison, I'm sorry about the eviction notice, but the checks from your boyfriend bounced 3 months in a row. My hands are tied. If you can't pay the back rent plus penalties by Friday, the sheriff's department will handle the removal." Bounced checks. Marcus hadn't just forgotten to pay rent. He'd written bad checks, knowing they would bounce, buying himself time while I lived in ignorance. The deception cut deeper than the abandonment because it meant this wasn't impulsive. This was calculated. I opened my laptop and logged into the bank account Marcus had insisted we share for household expenses, the account he'd promised to maintain while I couldn't work. The screen loaded, showing a balance of negative $47.32. 3 months of overdraft fees had compounded into a financial disaster. But more telling were the withdrawal patterns. While I'd been confined to bed, nauseated and trusting, Marcus had been systematically draining every penny. The transaction history told a story that made my blood run cold. Dinner at Romano's Steakhouse, the expensive restaurant downtown. $230 on a Tuesday night when he'd told me he was working late. Hotel charges at the Riverside Inn. Multiple charges. Multiple nights. While I'd been home alone, carrying his child and believing his lies about providing for us. The final insult came in the form of a charge I almost missed. Victoria's Secret. $315 spent just last week. I wasn't buying lingerie while pregnant and broke. But someone was. I screenshot every transaction, my lawyer brain, dormant since pregnancy complications forced me to leave my paralegal job, suddenly sharp and focused. Evidence. Everything was evidence. Marcus thought he was covering his tracks by abandoning me, but he'd left a digital trail that painted a picture of betrayal more vivid than any confession. My phone rang, and for a moment, hope flickered in my chest. Maybe it was Marcus calling to explain, to fix this nightmare. But the caller ID showed my sister's name, Rachel Morrison Hayes. "Selin, thank God you answered. I just drove past the Riverside Inn, and I saw Marcus's car in the parking lot, with a woman, a blonde woman. I took pictures because I thought you should know, but then I remembered you said he was out of town this week for work." Her voice trailed off as the implications settled between us. He wasn't out of town for work. He was 20 minutes away, playing house with someone else while I faced eviction carrying his child. "Rachel," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I need you to send me those pictures, and then I need you to come over. Bring your camera." "Why?" "Selin, what's going on?" "Marcus left me. The day I showed him the ultrasound. And now I'm being evicted because he's been writing bad checks for rent while spending our money on his new girlfriend." The silence on the line stretched long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then Rachel's voice came back, tight with barely controlled rage. "That bastard. That absolute bastard. I'm on my way over. And Selin? We're not just taking pictures. We're taking inventory. Of everything." She was right. If Marcus thought he could abandon me and our unborn child without consequences, he was about to learn otherwise. The apartment might be in both our names, but everything in it told a story of shared responsibility he was trying to escape. I walked through our home, my former home, with new eyes. The furniture we'd bought together using my savings account. The electronics were purchased with joint money when I'd been earning a steady paycheck. The artwork, the kitchen appliances, the bedding, all of it acquired during our relationship when we were building a future together. In the bedroom, I opened the closet we'd shared. His side was completely empty. He'd moved out while I'd been at my doctor's appointment last week, telling me he was looking for a better-paying job to support the baby. Another lie stacked on top of the others. But he'd been careless. In the back corner of the closet, behind where his shoes used to be, sat a small cardboard box. Inside, bank statements I'd never seen, credit card applications in both our names, and at the bottom, a lease agreement for a downtown loft apartment, signed by Marcus Caldwell and someone named Brianna Chen. Dated 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago. He'd been planning his escape for 3 weeks, securing a new life with his new girlfriend while I'd been showing him baby name books and talking about nursery colors. The lease showed a monthly rent of $2,800, nearly twice what our current apartment cost. Money he claimed he didn't have for our rent had somehow materialized for his fresh start. I photographed every document, every page, every signature. The lease agreement alone was enough to prove he'd been planning this abandonment, but the credit card applications were something more interesting. He'd used my information, my social security number, my employment history from before I'd gotten pregnant. Applications I'd never signed, using my credentials for cards I'd never see. Identity theft. The man who'd promised to love and protect me had committed identity theft to fund his escape. My phone buzzed with the photos from Rachel. Marcus's silver sedan parked outside the Riverside Inn, the same car that was supposed to be 3 states away for his work trip. A woman with long blonde hair walking beside him, her hand resting possessively on his arm. But the most damning photo was the last one. Marcus and the blonde woman loading boxes into her car. Boxes I recognized as coming from our apartment. He wasn't just abandoning me. He was stealing from me while doing it. The final piece of the puzzle came when I checked our shared cloud storage account, looking for any documents I might need. Marcus had deleted everything. Photos of us together, important documents, even pictures from my prenatal appointments. He was trying to erase any evidence that we'd ever been a couple, any proof that he had responsibilities to me and our unborn child. But he'd forgotten about the recycling folder. And in that folder, I found something that made my breath catch in my throat. Screenshots of text conversations between him and someone named Brianna. Messages that went back 6 months, long before our relationship had ended. Messages that talked about getting rid of the problem and starting fresh, and she'll never know. They'd been planning this for months. The pregnancy hadn't driven him away. The pregnancy had simply accelerated a timeline that was already in motion. I sat in the silence of the apartment that would soon no longer be mine, surrounded by evidence of the most comprehensive betrayal I could imagine. Marcus hadn't just left me. He'd systematically dismantled my life while pretending to build one with me. He'd stolen my identity, drained my resources, and abandoned me when I was most vulnerable. But as I stared at the ultrasound photo still stuck to our refrigerator, the black and white image of the child he'd rejected, something shifted inside me. The hurt and shock began to crystallize into something sharper, more focused. He'd made one crucial mistake in his careful plan to erase me. He'd underestimated me. The paralegal training he'd mocked as playing pretend lawyer had taught me how to gather evidence, how to build a case, how to present facts that spoke louder than denials. And I had facts: bank records, lease agreements, credit card fraud, identity theft, abandonment of financial responsibilities, a paper trail that painted a picture of deliberate, calculated cruelty. Marcus thought he was starting fresh with Brianna Chen in their downtown loft, free from the burden of responsibility. He'd never wanted, but fresh starts require clean slates, and his slate was about to get very, very dirty. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed. Patricia Valdez, the family law attorney I'd worked for during my brief paralegal career. She'd always said if I ever needed help, I should call. Well, I need help now. But more than that, I needed justice. The eviction notice still lay on my coffee table, a ticking clock counting down to my displacement. But it wouldn't be my ending. It would be my beginning. Because sometimes the most devastating betrayal becomes the foundation for the most perfect revenge. And I was about to build something Marcus Caldwell would never forget. Patricia Valdez answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and professional even at 7 p.m. "Selin, I haven't heard from you since you left the firm. How are you holding up?" "I'm pregnant, homeless in 3 days, and my ex-boyfriend has been committing identity theft to fund his new relationship," I said without preamble. "I need help." The silence that followed wasn't shocking. Patricia had heard worse in her 20 years of family law practice. It was calculation, the mental wheels turning as she assessed the legal landscape ahead of us. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. "Come in first thing tomorrow morning," she said finally. "Bring everything: bank statements, lease agreements, any communication records, medical documentation of your pregnancy. We're going to need to move fast." After hanging up, I spent the night doing what I did best: building a case. The paralegal training that Marcus had dismissed as cute became the foundation for something he'd never see coming. I organized every piece of evidence into chronological folders, cross-referenced financial records with timeline markers, and created a comprehensive picture of systematic financial abuse that would make even the most skeptical judge take notice. The truth was more extensive than I'd initially realized. Marcus hadn't just been careless with our money. He'd been methodical in his theft, starting small and escalating over the months as my pregnancy progressed and my ability to monitor our finances decreased. It began with tiny withdrawals I'd attributed to normal expenses. $20 here, $50 there, always with plausible explanations. "Gas for the car, babe. Picked up lunch for the guys at work. Had to get my mom a birthday gift." Small lies that accumulated into a pattern of deception. But the real revelation came when I cross-referenced his withdrawals with my medical appointment calendar. Every time I had a doctor's visit, every time I was confined to bed with severe morning sickness, Marcus had made substantial withdrawals. He'd been using my vulnerability as cover for his theft. The day I'd been hospitalized for dehydration for 15 weeks, Marcus had withdrawn $800 from our account. While I'd been hooked to an IV, worried about our baby's health, he'd been funding a romantic weekend with Brianna. The hotel charges from that weekend were all there in black and white. I printed everything, organized it into binders with labeled tabs, and prepared exhibits that would make Perry Mason proud. But the most damaging evidence wasn't financial. It was personal. The shared cloud account Marcus thought he'd cleaned revealed more than he'd intended when I dove deeper into the deletion logs. Every deleted photo, Every removed document left a timestamp trail, and those timestamps told a story of calculated erasure that began the day after I'd shown him our baby's ultrasound. He hadn't just panicked and left. He'd immediately begun, systematically removing evidence of our relationship, starting with deleting photos from our early dates and working forward chronologically. But he'd made one crucial error. He deleted items in order of emotional significance rather than strategic importance. The ultrasound photos were deleted first, then pictures of us looking at baby furniture, then images from the day we toured, potential apartments for our growing family. He'd erased our future before he'd erased our past, revealing exactly what had triggered his flight response. But digital forensics had advanced since Marcus's computer science degree, and deleted didn't mean gone. Using software I'd learned about during a case involving digital evidence recovery, I managed to restore nearly everything he'd thought he'd destroyed. The recovered files painted a picture that would haunt his attempts to present himself as a responsible adult to his new girlfriend. Screenshots of baby name discussions where he'd enthusiastically suggested Marcus Jr. for a boy. Photos of him assembling a crib he'd insisted on buying, because our son deserves the best. Messages to his friends bragging about becoming a father, all deleted within 24 hours of seeing our baby's first ultrasound. The timeline made his abandonment even more cruel. He hadn't gradually lost interest or slowly realized he wasn't ready for fatherhood. He'd been fully invested, even excited, until the moment our baby became real to him. Then he'd methodically erased every trace of that excitement while simultaneously planning his escape with surgical precision. As dawn broke over my soon-to-be former apartment, I realized Marcus had made another critical error. In his haste to steal and abandon, he'd left behind a trail that proved premeditation. The lease with Brianna wasn't signed impulsively after our breakup. It was dated 2 weeks before he'd even seen the ultrasound. He'd been planning to leave me before he knew. I was carrying his child. The pregnancy had simply provided convenient justification for abandoning responsibilities he'd never intended to honor. But the most devastating discovery came when I checked the credit monitoring service I'd signed up for during my paralegal days. Marcus hadn't just applied for credit cards in my name. He'd been approved for 3 of them, with a combined credit limit of $15,000. Cards that had been mailed to a P.O. box I'd never authorized, used for purchases I'd never made. The spending pattern on these stolen accounts revealed the true scope of his betrayal. Jewelry purchases that coincided with his early dates with Brianna. Electronics bought during his supposed work trips. Even the security deposit for their new apartment had been charged to a card opened fraudulently in my name. My identity hadn't just been stolen. It had been weaponized against me, used to fund the very relationship that had replaced me. I called Patricia at 8 a.m. sharp, my voice steady despite the sleepless night. It's worse than I thought. He's been planning this for months, and he's committed federal crimes to fund it. How bad? She asked, and I could hear her pen clicking, ready to take notes. Identity theft, credit fraud, abandonment of financial obligations to a pregnant partner, and systematic financial abuse documented over 6 months. I have bank records, hotel receipts, lease agreements, and recovered digital communications that prove premeditation. The silence stretched longer this time before Patricia spoke, her voice carrying a note of professional excitement that told me she understood the magnitude of what we were dealing with. Selin, honey, this isn't just a family law case anymore. This is criminal. And the civil implications. She paused, calculating. We're not just talking about child support. We're talking about damages, restitution, and enough evidence to ensure he faces serious legal consequences. There's more, I continued, consulting my notes. The shared lease agreement for our apartment makes him legally responsible for the rent he stopped paying. The bounced checks constitute check fraud in this state, and I found evidence he's been using company resources for personal expenses, which could affect his employment. I'd spent the early morning hours researching Marcus's employer, Davidson Tech Solutions, a mid-sized software company that prided itself on ethical business practices. Their employee handbook, publicly available on their website, had specific clauses about criminal behavior and misuse of company resources that could result in immediate termination. The hotel charges weren't just personal betrayals. Several had been made during business hours on weekdays when Marcus was supposed to be working. Company credit card records, if subpoenaed, would likely show a pattern of personal use that violated his employment contract. Patricia, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me, I said, my voice dropping to the tone I'd used when discussing sensitive cases during my paralegal days. If someone had done this to your daughter, what would you do? Her laugh was sharp and humorless. I'd destroy him legally, financially, and professionally. And then I'd make sure every woman in his future knew exactly what kind of man they were dealing with. Good, I replied, because that's exactly what we're going to do. The plan that emerged during our morning meeting was comprehensive and devastating. Patricia had consulted with a criminal attorney who specialized in identity theft cases, and the evidence I'd gathered was strong enough to pursue felony charges. But the criminal case was just the beginning. The civil lawsuit would seek damages not just for the money Marcus had stolen, but for the emotional distress, the financial hardship, and the costs associated with his abandonment. We'd go after his assets, his income, and his ability to make financial decisions without court oversight.
But Patricia's most interesting suggestion involved Brianna Chen. She's an unknowing accomplice at this point, Patricia explained, reviewing the lease agreement. But if she's been benefiting from stolen funds, she could be held partially liable for restitution. More importantly, she deserves to know that her new boyfriend is a felon who abandoned his pregnant ex-girlfriend. The idea of exposing Marcus to Brianna wasn't about revenge, though I won't pretend the thought didn't provide some satisfaction. It was about justice. Brianna had unknowingly participated in my victimization, and she had the right to make informed decisions about her relationship. More practically, Brianna's involvement gave us leverage. Marcus might be willing to fight legal consequences that only affected him, but if his new relationship was threatened by the revelation of his crimes, he might be more motivated to settle quickly and quietly. Patricia had one final question that crystallized everything we were planning. Celine, what outcome do you want from this? Do you want him back? Do you want him to suffer? Do you want your child to have a relationship with him? Because the path we're about to go down will determine all of that. I thought about the ultrasound photo still stuck to my refrigerator, the image of the child Marcus had rejected. I thought about the nights I'd spent alone and scared while he was building a new life with stolen money. I thought about the systematic cruelty of someone who would abandon a pregnant woman while stealing her identity to fund his escape. I want him to face consequences, I said finally, real consequences that ensure he can't do this to anyone else. I want my child to be financially secure, and I want him to understand that abandoning your responsibilities has a price. Patricia smiled, the expression sharp and predatory. Then let's make sure he pays it. As I left her office that morning, armed with legal strategies and professional support, I felt something I hadn't experienced since finding the eviction notice: power. Marcus had built his escape plan on the assumption that I was helpless, that abandoning me would be consequence-free. He was about to learn how wrong he'd been. The afternoon brought a new development that would accelerate our timeline. My phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, and the voice on the other end introduced herself as Amanda Foster, a manager at Davidson Tech Solutions. Miss Morrison, I'm calling because your name came up in our internal audit of company expenses. We've found some irregularities in one of our employees' accounts, and your name appears on several receipts as an authorized user. Could we schedule a time to discuss this? Marcus hadn't just stolen from me. He'd been stealing from his employer, too, using my name as cover for fraudulent expense reports. The web of his deception was larger than I had imagined, and it was about to collapse on him from multiple directions. I'd be happy to discuss this, I told Amanda Foster, But I should mention that I've never been an authorized user on any company accounts. If my name appears on anything, it's likely been forged. The pause that followed told me everything I needed to know about how seriously Davidson Tech Solutions took employee theft. Marcus's carefully constructed house of lies was built on a foundation of sand, and the tide was about to come in.
The silence in the room was deafening as Amanda cross-referenced the dates. Miss Morrison, are you telling me that Mr. Caldwell has been committing expense fraud by claiming false companions on business travel? I'm telling you that Marcus Caldwell has been stealing from your company for at least 6 months, using my name to justify fraudulent expenses while conducting personal affairs on company time and money. I produced the photographs Rachel had taken at the Rubberside Inn, clearly showing Marcus with Brianna during hours when his company calendar showed him in client meetings. This woman isn't me, I continued, but according to his expense reports from that day, he was entertaining me at company expense for business development purposes. In reality, he was conducting a personal relationship while defrauding Davidson Tech Solutions. Amanda Foster's professional composure cracked slightly. Miss Foster, these are very serious allegations. Do you have additional evidence? The flash drive I handed her contained everything. Bank statements showing the systematic theft, credit card records revealing fraudulent charges, communication logs proving Marcus had been planning his deception for months. There's something else you need to know, I said, playing my final card. As of this morning, Marcus Caldwell is facing felony charges for identity theft, credit fraud, and systematic financial abuse. The district attorney's office has opened a formal investigation. Amanda Foster's face went pale. Employees facing felony charges were immediate termination risks, especially in a company that handled sensitive client data. Ms. Foster, I want to be clear about something. I'm not here seeking revenge or trying to destroy someone's career out of spite. I'm here because Marcus Caldwell is a criminal who has been using your company's resources to commit crimes, and your clients deserve to know they're not working with someone who steals money and identities. The meeting concluded with Amanda promising a full internal investigation and immediate suspension of Marcus's company access pending review. She also provided me with contact information for their legal department, which would need detailed statements for their own potential criminal referral. As I left Davidson Tech Solutions, my phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Package delivered to Sterling Creative. Brianna Chen received it personally. The receptionist said she went white and immediately canceled her afternoon meetings. The package sent to Brianna's workplace contained carefully selected evidence designed to answer the questions she'd inevitably have about her boyfriend's mysterious behavior. The lease agreement showed he'd been planning to leave me before my pregnancy. The bank records proving he'd stolen my money to fund their relationship. The ultrasound photo that revealed exactly what he'd abandoned. Not cruel, just truth, delivered with surgical precision to someone who deserved to make informed decisions about her future. My phone rang as I reached my car. Unknown number, but I recognized the area code from Davidson Tech Solutions. Miss Morrison, this is David Shen, General Counsel for Davidson Tech. Amanda Foster asked me to call you regarding the Marcus Caldwell situation. Would you be available to provide a formal statement this afternoon? Absolutely. I have documentation, recorded communication, and photographic evidence that should interest your legal team. Ms. Morrison, I have to ask, are you represented by counsel in this matter? Yes. Patricia Valdez from Valdez Family Law is handling my case. Good. Would Ms. Valdez be available to join our meeting? This situation may have criminal implications that extend beyond employment issues. Within 2 hours, Patricia and I sat across from Davidson Tech's entire legal team, laying out a case that made Marcus Caldwell look like a one-man crime wave. The expense fraud was just the beginning. Computer forensics would likely reveal misuse of company resources, unauthorized access to client information, and potential data breaches related to his personal activities. Ms. Morrison, David Chen said, reviewing the evidence for the third time. This is one of the most comprehensive cases of employee fraud I've ever encountered. We'll be terminating Mr. Caldwell immediately and referring this matter to both law enforcement and our professional liability insurers. There's one more thing, I added, producing the final piece of documentation I'd been saving. Marcus used his employment at Davidson Tech Solutions to qualify for credit applications, apartment leases, and other financial obligations. When his employment status changes, those creditors will need to be notified. The implications rippled through the room like a shockwave. Not only would Marcus lose his job, but every financial obligation he'd incurred based on that employment would potentially become immediately due. As Patricia and I left Davidson Tech building, my phone buzzed with the first panicked call from Marcus himself. "Celine, what the hell have you done? My keycard stopped working. Security won't let me in the building. And Brianna," his voice cracked, "Brianna found some papers. She's asking questions I don't know how to answer." "What kind of questions, Marcus?" "She wants to know why you're on bank statements from our joint account. She wants to know why there are hotel receipts with your name on them from trips I told her I took alone. She found some ultrasound pictures and she's not handling it well." The irony was staggering. He was worried about hurting the woman he'd cheated with while showing no concern for the pregnant woman he'd abandoned. "You're right," I said. "Brianna doesn't deserve to be hurt. That's why she deserves to know the truth about who she's been dating. She deserves to make informed decisions about her future based on facts, not the lies you've been telling her." "What am I supposed to tell her?" "Try the truth, Marcus. Tell her you abandoned your pregnant girlfriend to be with her. Tell her you stole money to fund your relationship with her. Tell her you committed identity theft to pay for your new apartment with her. Let her decide if that's the kind of man she wants to be with."
I hung up before he could respond, but my phone immediately rang again. This time, the caller ID showed Patricia's office number. "Celine, you need to get down here immediately." Patricia's voice carried an urgency I'd never heard before. "Marcus Caldwell just showed up at my office demanding to speak with you. Building security has him contained in the lobby, but he's making quite a scene." "What kind of scene?" "The kind that involves threats, accusations, and several witnesses with smartphones. I think he's about to provide us with even more evidence for our case." As I drove toward Patricia's office building, I realized Marcus was doing exactly what I'd hoped he would do. Instead of accepting responsibility and trying to minimize the damage, he was escalating the situation and creating more evidence of his unstable, threatening behavior. Perfect. The process server would find him easily now, and there would be plenty of witnesses when he was officially notified of the criminal complaints and civil lawsuit. Marcus Caldwell had spent months planning his escape from responsibility. Now he was about to discover that some consequences can't be escaped, only faced. And I was going to make sure he faced every single one. The lobby of Patricia's law firm buzzed with the kind of tense energy that comes right before something explodes. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see Marcus pacing like a caged animal, his expensive shirt wrinkled and his usually perfect hair disheveled. 2 security guards flanked him while a small crowd of office workers pretending to check their phones while actually recording everything. Patricia met me at the elevator, her expression grim but satisfied. "He's been here for 20 minutes demanding to see you and making increasingly erratic statements. Building management called the police, but I asked them to wait. I thought you might want to witness this meltdown firsthand." Through the glass doors, Marcus caught sight of me, and his face transformed from desperation to rage. He started toward the entrance, but security stepped in his path. The confrontation was playing out exactly as I'd hoped, publicly, with witnesses, and with Marcus demonstrating the kind of unstable behavior that would strengthen every legal argument we'd built against him. "Celine," his voice carried through the glass as he pressed his face against the door. "You can't hide behind lawyers forever. We need to talk about this like adults." Like adults. The man who had abandoned his pregnant girlfriend and stolen her identity wanted to discuss adult behavior. Patricia's phone buzzed.
That's the process server. He's in the parking garage, waiting for the right moment to deliver the legal papers. With this crowd, Marcus won't be able to claim he didn't receive proper service. I watched Marcus through the glass, noting how his desperation was morphing into something uglier. The smooth-talking charmer who had convinced me to trust him with my financial future was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. "Let me go out there," I said to Patricia. "I want him to understand exactly what's happening before he gets served." "Celine, I don't think that's wise. He's clearly agitated and he's also surrounded by witnesses and security cameras. This is the safest he'll ever be to have this conversation." Patricia nodded reluctantly and spoke to the security guards through the intercom. "Please allow Miss Morrison to speak with Mr. Caldwell, but maintain close proximity. If he makes any threatening moves, intervene immediately." The glass door slid open, and I stepped into the lobby. Marcus rushed toward me, stopping just short when security moved closer. "Celine, thank God. We need to fix this mess before it gets out of hand. Just tell these lawyers to back off and we can work something out privately." "What exactly do you think needs to be fixed, Marcus?" His eyes darted around the lobby, suddenly aware of the phones pointed in his direction and the security guards watching his every move. "You know what I mean. This whole legal thing, the criminal complaints, my job situation. Brianna's been asking questions and you can't answer them because you'd have to tell the truth for the first time in months." "That's not fair, Celine. I made some mistakes, but you're trying to destroy my entire life. Think about what this means for the baby. Do you really want your child to grow up knowing their father is in prison?" The manipulation was breathtaking. He was trying to use our unborn child as leverage, while simultaneously spent months trying to erase any evidence that the child existed. "Marcus, our child is going to grow up knowing their father abandoned their pregnant mother and stole money to fund his relationship with another woman. That's the truth, and no amount of legal maneuvering will change it. I never abandoned you. I just needed some space to figure things out. The whole pregnancy thing happened so fast and I panicked, but that doesn't make me a criminal." "Identity theft makes you a criminal. Credit card fraud makes you a criminal. The forged signatures and stolen money make you a criminal. Your feelings about my pregnancy are irrelevant to the felonies you committed." His face flushed red, and his voice rose loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear clearly. "You're acting like I'm some kind of monster. All I did was try to make a clean break instead of dragging this out. So what if I moved on? So what if I found someone who actually understands me? That's not a crime." "Moving on isn't a crime, Marcus. But moving on by stealing $15,000 from credit cards you opened fraudulently in my name, that's definitely a crime." The number hit him like a physical blow. His mouth opened and closed without sound as he realized I knew the full extent of his theft. "How did... You mean, that's not... Those cards were for emergencies." "Like emergencies like paying for your new girlfriend's jewelry? Like funding romantic getaways while I was facing eviction? Like covering the security deposit on your secret apartment?" Each revelation landed with precision, and I could see him calculating how much I knew versus how much he could still deny. "Celine, please, you're making this sound worse than it is. I was always planning to pay everything back once I got on my feet with the new job." "What new job? You just got fired from Davidson Tech for expense fraud. Your income verification for the apartment lease just became worthless. Your credit applications based on false employment information are now fraudulent contracts." The color drained from his face as the domino effect became clear to him for the first time. "They can't fire me over personal issues. I'll fight the termination. I'll get my job back." "They fired you for stealing company money, Marcus, for submitting fraudulent expense reports using my name to cover your affairs. That's not personal issues. That's criminal behavior that exposed them to liability." "You went to my job?" His voice cracked with disbelief. "You actually went to my workplace and tried to get me fired?"
I went to your workplace and provided evidence of crimes you committed using company resources. They made the decision to fire you based on your actions, not mine. Marcus looked around the lobby wildly, as if searching for someone who might take his side or provide an escape route. Instead, he found a dozen strangers documenting his public meltdown.
This is insane. You can't just destroy someone's life because you're angry about a breakup. I'm not angry about a breakup, Marcus. I'm angry about systematic financial abuse. I'm angry about identity theft. I'm angry about abandonment during pregnancy. I'm angry about 3 months of lies while you planned your escape. But we were together for 2 years. That has to count for something. It counted for something right up until the moment you decided our relationship was worth stealing $15,000 to escape from. That's when I saw the process server approaching through the crowd. A middle-aged man in a conservative suit, carrying a manila envelope and looking like he'd done this 1,000 times before. Marcus Caldwell? The process server's voice was calm and professional. Marcus spun around, his eyes widening as he recognized what was happening. You've been served with criminal complaints filed with the district attorney's office for identity theft, credit fraud, and systematic financial abuse. You've also been served with a civil lawsuit seeking damages, restitution, and punitive awards related to those criminal acts. The manila envelope landed in Marcus's hands like it weighed 100 pounds. Around the lobby, smartphones recorded the moment his face registered the reality of what he was holding. "This is a mistake," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "There has to be some mistake." "No mistake, sir. Court date is scheduled for next Friday at 9 a.m. Failure to appear will result in a bench warrant for your arrest." The process server turned and walked away, leaving Marcus standing in the middle of the lobby holding legal papers that represented the complete collapse of his carefully constructed new life. "Celine," he said, his voice breaking, "please, we can still fix this. I'll pay everything back. I'll make it right. Just ask your lawyer to drop the charges." "I can't drop criminal charges, Marcus. Those were filed by the district attorney's office based on evidence of felonies. Only they can drop those charges, and they typically don't drop cases with this much documentation." "But the civil suit, you can drop that, right?" I looked at him standing there, holding the legal documents that outlined exactly how much his betrayal was going to cost him, and something I hadn't expected: pity. "Marcus, the civil suit seeks restitution for money you stole, damages for the harm you caused, and punitive awards designed to ensure you never do this to another woman. Why would I drop a lawsuit that holds you accountable for your choices?" "Because I'm the father of your baby. Because we used to love each other. Because this is going to hurt everyone involved. The baby you tried to erase from your digital history, the love you abandoned for a woman you'd been seeing behind my back for months, the hurt you caused by systematically stealing from me while I was carrying your child." His shoulders sagged as the full weight of his situation settled on him. The lobby crowd was beginning to disperse, their entertainment concluded, but the security cameras had recorded everything. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "Now you hire a lawyer and prepare for the consequences of your actions. Criminal court first, then civil court. Your new girlfriend gets to decide whether she wants to stay with someone facing federal charges. Your creditors get to decide whether they want to work with someone whose income just disappeared. And the baby." For the first time since this conversation started, his question sounded genuine rather than manipulative. "The baby will be fine, Marcus. I'll make sure of that. But your role in this child's life will be determined by a family court judge based on your fitness as a parent and your ability to meet your financial obligations." "Celine, I know I messed up, but I'm not a bad person. I got scared and made some stupid decisions." Stupid decisions are forgetting to pay a bill or saying something hurtful in an argument.
What you did was plan and execute a systematic campaign of theft and abandonment over the course of months. That's not stupidity, Marcus. That's calculated cruelty. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Brianna Chen just posted on social media that she's single and moving back in with her parents. Looks like your evidence package was effective. I showed Marcus the message, watching his face crumble as his new relationship joined his job and his financial stability in the wreckage of his choices. She left me, he said, more to himself than to me. She said she couldn't be with someone who would abandon a pregnant woman. She said I was a coward and a thief. She's right. But what about the apartment? The lease is in both our names. If she's not paying her half? The apartment he'd secured with stolen money was now another financial burden he couldn't afford. The irony was perfect. That sounds like a problem you'll need to solve, Marcus, along with all the other problems created by your criminal behavior. I turned to walk back into Patricia's office, but Marcus's voice stopped me. Celine, wait, what if I plead guilty to everything? What if I take full responsibility and try to make this right? Would that matter to you at all? I turned back to face him one last time, this man who had shared my bed, my dreams, and my trust before deciding all of it was worth less than his freedom from responsibility. Marcus, taking responsibility isn't something you do to get a better deal. It's something you do because it's right. If you want to plead guilty and make restitution, do it because you understand the harm you've caused, not do it as a negotiation tactic. But would it help with the baby situation, I mean? The baby situation will be resolved in family court based on what's best for the child. Your criminal behavior and financial irresponsibility will be factors in that decision regardless of how you plead. As I walked back through the glass doors, I could hear Marcus behind me, finally understanding that his actions had consequences he couldn't charm or manipulate his way out of. Patricia was waiting with a satisfied smile and a cup of coffee that smelled like victory. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Like justice is finally catching up to someone who thought he was too smart to face consequences," I replied. "What happens next?" "Next, we prepare for court, both criminal and civil. And next, Marcus Caldwell learns that some debts can't be escaped, only paid." The next 72 hours unfolded like a masterclass in consequences. While I watched from the safety of my sister Rachel's guest bedroom, my temporary refuge until the legal settlements came through, Marcus's world collapsed with the methodical precision of a controlled demolition.
It started with his credit cards being frozen at 6 a.m. on Friday morning. The banks had been notified of his terminated employment status through automated systems that flagged any significant changes in income verification. Without Davidson Tech Solutions vouching for his salary, his creditworthiness evaporated overnight. Rachel brought me coffee and her laptop, showing me the cascade of notifications appearing on Marcus's social media accounts. Automated messages from credit monitoring services, overdue payment alerts from subscription services. Most tellingly, a frantic Facebook post from 10 p.m. the night before. "Anyone know a good lawyer?" Asking for a friend. "He's spiraling," Rachel observed, scrolling through increasingly desperate posts. "Look at this one from 3 hours ago." The post was a rambling defense of his character, claiming he was the victim of a vindictive ex-girlfriend who couldn't accept their mutual breakup. The comments section was brutal. Friends and family members who had seen the evidence were asking pointed questions about identity theft and abandoned pregnancy responsibilities. His mother, Janet Caldwell, had posted a comment that made my coffee taste better. "Marcus, call me immediately. Your father and I need to understand why strangers are sending us court documents with your name on them." "His parents know," I said, screenshotting everything for Patricia's files. "Someone sent them copies of the criminal complaints." "That would be me," Rachel admitted with a grin. "I figured they deserved to know what their son had been up to, especially since your baby will be their grandchild
whether Marcus acknowledges it or not. My phone buzzed with a call from Patricia. Celine, you need to see the news. Channel 7 just ran a story about Davidson Tech Solutions firing an employee for expense fraud involving identity theft. They didn't name Marcus specifically, but anyone who knows him will put the pieces together, I finished. How did the media get the story so fast? Davidson Tech issued a press release yesterday announcing enhanced security measures after discovering employee misconduct. They're trying to get ahead of any client concerns about data security. The reporter connected it to the criminal complaints filed in family court. The news story was devastating for Marcus's reputation. Even without naming him directly, the details were specific enough that anyone in his professional or social circle would recognize the case. Software engineer, 27 years old, terminated for systematic expense fraud involving a pregnant ex-girlfriend. The story might as well have included his photo and home address. But the real earthquake hit when Amanda Foster from Davidson Tech Solutions called me directly. Miss Morrison, I wanted to update you on our internal investigation. We've discovered that Marcus's misconduct was far more extensive than initially believed. Our forensic accountants have identified fraudulent expense claims totaling nearly $30,000 over the past 8 months. $30,000. I'd known about the $15,000 in credit card fraud, but Marcus had been stealing from his employer on an even larger scale. We've also found evidence that he was using company equipment and resources for personal activities during work hours. Our IT department discovered hundreds of personal emails, dating app usage, and even apartment hunting websites accessed from his company computer during business hours. What does this mean for the criminal case? It means we're filing our own criminal complaint with the district attorney's office. Corporate fraud of this magnitude carries serious federal penalties. Mr. Caldwell is looking at potential prison time even before your personal case is considered. After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence. Marcus hadn't just been a bad boyfriend who panicked about pregnancy. He'd been systematically stealing from everyone around him for months, using his charm and professional position to cover increasingly brazen financial crimes. The apartment situation provided the next domino in his collapse. Property management for the downtown loft had received notice of his employment termination through automated income verification systems. Without Brianna's half of the rent and no way to prove sufficient income, Marcus received a 30-day notice to vacate or provide a qualified cosigner. But finding a cosigner required explaining why he needed one, which meant admitting to criminal charges, job loss, and financial fraud. His credit score, once respectable, had plummeted as missed payments and frozen accounts triggered automated reporting to credit bureaus. Rachel showed me more social media drama unfolding in real time. Marcus's college friends were posting screenshots of news articles about Davidson Tech, asking if this was the same Marcus they knew. His professional network on LinkedIn was quietly disconnecting from him as word spread about his termination and criminal charges. Most satisfying was a post from his gym buddy, Derek Santos. "Bro, is it true you abandoned your pregnant girlfriend and stole her money? Because if so, that's messed up even for you." The comment thread that followed was brutal. Marcus's attempts to defend himself only made things worse, with each explanation raising new questions about his character and choices. "I can't believe he's actually responding to these posts," Rachel said, reading over my shoulder. "He's making himself look worse with every comment." Narcissists can't resist defending themselves, even when staying quiet would be the smarter strategy. My phone rang with another unknown number. This time, the voice belonged to someone I'd never expected to hear from. "Miss Morrison, this is Diane Chen, Brianna's mother. I hope you don't mind me calling, but Brianna gave me your number. She wanted me to speak with you directly." I hadn't considered how Marcus's crimes would affect Brianna's family, but Mrs. Chen's voice carried the weight of someone whose daughter had been deceived as thoroughly as I had been. Miss Morrison, please don't apologize. My daughter needed to know the truth about that man. We're grateful you had the courage to expose him before things went any further. How is Brianna handling everything? She's devastated, of course, but she's also angry. She had no idea he was involved with you, let alone that you were pregnant. She thought he was single when they met, and he maintained that lie for months. The conversation revealed another layer of Marcus's deception. He hadn't just abandoned me for Brianna. He'd convinced Brianna that I didn't exist, creating an entirely fictional backstory about his single life and available income. Miss Morrison, Brianna wanted you to know that she's prepared to testify in court if needed. She has text messages and emails where Marcus lied about his relationship status, his financial situation, and his work schedule. She wants him held accountable for deceiving both of you. After hanging up, I realized Marcus had created not one, but two victims. Brianna had been manipulated just as systematically as I had been, fed lies about his availability while unknowingly participating in spending money stolen from his pregnant ex-girlfriend. The weekend brought a new development that accelerated his downward spiral. Marcus's parents had driven up from their retirement community in Florida, arriving at his apartment demanding answers about the criminal charges and pregnancy situation.
Rachel had positioned herself at a coffee shop across from his building, providing real-time updates on the family drama unfolding in the parking lot. His dad looks furious, she texted with photos. They've been arguing for an hour. His mom is crying. Someone called building security because of the shouting. The photos showed Marcus's father, a retired military officer, holding what appeared to be printed copies of the court documents. His mother clutched a tissue while gesturing emphatically toward Marcus, who stood with his shoulders slumped in defeat. But the most interesting photo showed a woman I didn't recognize approaching the group. Rachel's next text identified her. "That's Sarah Martinez, the property manager for his building. This can't be good." It wasn't good. Sarah Martinez was serving Marcus with a formal eviction notice. 30 days to vacate due to insufficient income verification and disturbing the peace complaints from neighbors. His public arguments with his parents had violated lease clauses about disruptive behavior. She handed him papers right in front of his parents, Rachel reported. His dad is reading the eviction notice now. His face is getting redder by the minute. The family confrontation continued for another hour before Marcus's parents stormed off, leaving him alone in the parking lot holding eviction papers and criminal complaints. The image Rachel captured of that moment, Marcus standing alone, surrounded by legal documents, became the perfect metaphor for how isolation feels when all your lies finally catch up with you. Sunday brought the final blow to his rapidly collapsing world. The district attorney's office had fast-tracked his case due to the overwhelming evidence and corporate victim involvement. Marcus received notice that his preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following Wednesday, giving him less than 72 hours to find legal representation. But finding a lawyer required money he didn't have and credibility he'd already lost. The Defense Public Defender's Office would eventually be assigned to his case, but their caseload meant minimal attention to what they'd see as a straightforward fraud prosecution. Patricia called with an update on the civil case developments. Celine, Marcus's attorney, called this morning asking about settlement discussions. Apparently, he's interested in resolving the civil matter quickly to focus on defending the criminal charges. What kind of settlement? Full restitution of the stolen money, coverage of your medical expenses and legal fees, plus additional damages for emotional distress. They're also willing to agree to supervised visitation for any future parental rights, acknowledging that his behavior makes unsupervised access inappropriate. The settlement offer was more comprehensive than I'd expected, but it represented Marcus's recognition that fighting both criminal and civil cases simultaneously was beyond his resources. What do you recommend? I recommend we counter with higher damages and mandatory counseling requirements before any visitation rights are considered. He needs to demonstrate sustained behavioral change and financial responsibility before being trusted with a child. As Sunday evening arrived, I sat in Rachel's living room watching the systematic destruction of a life built on lies and theft.
Marcus had gone from employed professional with a promising relationship to unemployed criminal facing eviction and family estrangement in less than a week. But the most poetic justice was still coming. His preliminary hearing would be held in the same courthouse where he'd abandoned me to face eviction alone. The same judge who might have overseen my homelessness would now decide his bail conditions and pretrial restrictions. Rachel brought me dinner and the latest social media update. He deactivated all his accounts, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, everything. Complete digital disappearance. Too little too late, I replied, reviewing the screenshots we'd already captured. The evidence is preserved and his professional reputation is already destroyed. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Marcus. Please call me. We need to talk about making this right. I showed the message to Rachel, who rolled her eyes. Even now, he thinks he can negotiate his way out of the consequences. I didn't respond to the text. Marcus had lost the right to my attention when he chose theft and abandonment over honesty and responsibility. If he wanted to make things right, he could do it through his lawyer and the court system. The systematic unraveling was nearly complete. Marcus's world had collapsed as methodically as he'd tried to dismantle mine. But unlike his victims, he'd brought every consequence on himself through calculated choices and deliberate crimes. Tomorrow would bring new developments, new consequences, and new evidence of how thoroughly justice was catching up with Marcus Caldwell. The man who thought he could steal his way to a fresh start was about to learn that some debts follow you no matter how far you run. Wednesday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. At 9 a.m. sharp, Marcus Caldwell would face a judge for his preliminary hearing on multiple felony charges, but I had a different courtroom appearance scheduled for the same morning, one that would ensure his public reckoning extended beyond criminal proceedings. Patricia met me at the courthouse steps, carrying a briefcase that contained the civil complaint we'd strategically timed to coincide with his criminal hearing. The family court was located directly across the hall from criminal court, ensuring that anyone attending his preliminary hearing would witness both proceedings. The media will be here, Patricia warned as we approached the security checkpoint. Davidson Tech's press release generated interest, and someone leaked that today's hearings involved the same case. Are you prepared for that level of exposure? I'm prepared for Marcus to face the consequences of his actions in front of everyone who needs to see what kind of man he really is. The courthouse lobby buzzed with the controlled chaos of morning proceedings. Lawyers consulted with clients, families whispered nervously on benches, and court reporters wheeled equipment between courtrooms. But the unusual element was the cluster of people I recognized from Marcus's social media. College friends, work colleagues, and family members who had apparently come to witness his legal proceedings. Among them, I spotted Janet and Robert Caldwell, Marcus's parents, looking aged beyond their years and clutching each other for support. Near the elevator, Brianna Chen stood with her mother, both women carrying manila folders that I assumed contained the evidence they'd promised to provide. Most interesting was the group of young professionals near the information desk, some of whom I recognized as Davidson Tech Solutions employees. Marcus's crimes had become office gossip, and his former colleagues had apparently decided to witness his downfall firsthand. Quite a crowd, Patricia observed. I don't think Marcus was expecting this level of public interest in his legal problems. We took seats in the family court gallery, positioned to observe both the civil proceedings we'd initiated and the criminal hearing across the hall. At exactly 9 a.m., both courtrooms would be in session, creating a dual-track public exposure of Marcus's systematic crimes. The bailiff called family court to order, and Judge Elizabeth Harper took the bench. Judge Harper had a reputation for no-nonsense proceedings and particular sensitivity to cases involving pregnancy-related financial abuse.
Case number FC 2024-8847, Morrison versus Caldwell, the clerk announced. Civil complaint seeking damages for identity theft, financial abuse, and abandonment of obligations to a pregnant partner. Patricia stood and addressed the court with the precision of a surgeon making the first incision. Your Honor, this case involves systematic criminal behavior by the defendant who abandoned his pregnant girlfriend after stealing her identity to commit credit fraud totaling nearly $30,000. The defendant used stolen funds to establish a new relationship while leaving the plaintiff facing eviction and homelessness. The gallery stirred as Patricia's opening statement laid out facts that many attendees hadn't fully understood. Marcus's college friends exchanged shocked glances. His former colleagues whispered among themselves. Even his parents looked stunned by the comprehensive nature of the allegations. Furthermore, Your Honor, the defendant is simultaneously facing criminal charges in this courthouse this morning for these same actions, demonstrating the serious nature of his systematic abuse. Judge Harper's eyebrows rose slightly at the mention of concurrent criminal proceedings. Counselor, are you saying the defendant is in criminal court right now, facing related charges? Yes, Your Honor. Preliminary hearing in Judge Morrison's courtroom across the hall, beginning at 9 a.m. The judge glanced at her watch and made a note. Very well. Where is the defendant this morning? We believe he's in criminal court, Your Honor, possibly without adequate legal representation for either proceeding. The implication hung in the courtroom like smoke. Marcus was facing simultaneous legal proceedings in two different courts, likely overwhelmed and underrepresented in both. Your Honor, Patricia continued, we'd like to present evidence of the defendant's systematic criminal behavior and request immediate asset preservation to ensure restitution remains possible. What followed was a methodical presentation of evidence that painted Marcus as a calculating predator rather than a panicked young man. Bank records showing the timeline of theft, credit card applications bearing forged signatures, medical records proving I'd been dealing with pregnancy complications while he'd been planning his escape. But the most damaging evidence was the digital timeline Patricia had reconstructed, showing how Marcus had systematically deleted evidence of our relationship and my pregnancy while simultaneously establishing his new life with Brianna Chen. Your Honor, the defendant didn't just abandon his pregnant girlfriend, he attempted to erase all evidence that she and their child ever existed. These screenshots show him deleting ultrasound photos, pregnancy-related discussions, and baby planning conversations within hours of deciding to leave. The gallery was completely silent as Patricia displayed the evidence on courtroom monitors. Marcus's parents stared at the screens showing their son's calculated cruelty in real-time digital evidence. Judge Harper studied the evidence with the focused attention of someone who had seen many cases, but rarely one this comprehensive. Counselor, this appears to be more than a civil matter. These allegations suggest systematic criminal behavior. Yes, Your Honor, which is why the defendant is facing felony charges across the hall at this very moment. At that precise moment, the courtroom doors opened and Marcus himself appeared, looking disheveled and confused. He'd apparently tried to attend both hearings and had chosen the civil proceeding, perhaps thinking it would be more serious than criminal court. The effect of his entrance was electric. Everyone in the gallery turned to stare at him, including his parents, his former colleagues, and Brianna Chen, who stood up as if she'd seen a ghost. Mr. Caldwell, Judge Upper said sternly, am I to understand you have criminal proceedings scheduled simultaneously with this civil hearing? Marcus stood frozen in the doorway, apparently realizing he'd made a strategic error by choosing to attend family court instead of criminal court. Your Honor, Yes, but I thought this was more important to resolve first. Mr. Caldwell, criminal proceedings take precedence over civil matters. You should be in Judge Morrison's courtroom right now. But, Your Honor, I need to explain my side of the story. There are misunderstandings about what really happened between me and Celine. Judge Harper's expression could have frozen water. Mr. Caldwell, this court is not interested in your explanations. This court is interested in evidence, which appears to be overwhelming against you. Do you have legal representation for these proceedings? I'm trying to find a lawyer, but it's complicated because of the criminal charges, and my financial situation has become difficult. The admission that he couldn't afford adequate legal representation while facing serious charges created murmurs throughout the gallery. His former colleagues were recording everything on their phones, undoubtedly for office gossip later. Your Honor, Patricia interjected, the defendant's financial difficulties stem directly from the criminal behavior outlined in our complaint. He cannot afford legal representation because he lost his employment due to corporate fraud and identity theft.
Furthermore, Your Honor, the defendant is currently facing eviction from his apartment because he can no longer prove adequate income to maintain his lease. The same lease he secured using funds stolen from our client. Judge Harper was clearly running out of patience with Marcus's situation. Mr. Caldwell, you need to be in criminal court immediately. However, since you're here, I'm going to address the civil matter briefly. She turned to the gallery, speaking in a voice that carried to every corner of the courtroom. This case involves allegations of systematic financial abuse against a pregnant woman, identity theft totaling nearly $30,000, and deliberate abandonment of parental responsibilities. The evidence presented suggests calculated criminal behavior over a period of months. The judge's summary was devastating, delivered to an audience that included everyone Marcus had tried to impress or deceive. His parents sat in stunned silence. His former colleagues whispered among themselves. Brianna Chen's mother shook her head in disgust. Mr. Caldwell, I'm issuing a temporary restraining order preventing you from disposing of any assets until this matter is resolved. I'm also ordering immediate wage garnishment once you secure employment, with payments going directly to Miss Morrison for restitution. But, Your Honor, I don't have any assets to dispose of, and I don't have a job. Then you'd better find employment quickly, Mr. Caldwell, because this court will not tolerate someone abandoning their financial responsibilities to a pregnant woman while living on stolen money. Judge Harper's gavel came down with finality, but the public humiliation was just beginning. As Marcus tried to leave the courtroom quietly, he was intercepted by a bailiff from criminal court. Mr. Caldwell, Judge Morrison is issuing a bench warrant for your arrest for failure to appear at your preliminary hearing. You need to come with me immediately.
The arrest happened in full view of everyone who had come to witness his legal proceedings. His parents watched in horror as their son was handcuffed and led away for missing his criminal court appearance while trying to minimize his civil liability. But the most devastating moment came as Marcus was being escorted out in handcuffs. Brianna Chen stepped forward, holding a thick manila folder. "Excuse me, officer," she said to the bailiff. "I have evidence for the district attorney's office regarding Mr. Caldwell's criminal case, text messages where he admitted to stealing money and lying about his relationship status." She handed the folder to the bailiff, speaking loudly enough for the entire gallery to hear. "I want to make sure the prosecutor has everything they need to hold him accountable for deceiving multiple women and stealing money to fund his lies." The symbolism was perfect. Marcus's new girlfriend publicly delivers evidence that would help convict him, demonstrating how completely his web of deception had collapsed. As the bailiff led Marcus away in handcuffs, his father stood up and addressed the courtroom in a voice that carried the weight of military authority and parental disappointment. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want everyone here to know that this man does not represent the values his mother and I tried to instill in him. What he's done to Miss Morrison and their unborn child is inexcusable, and we support whatever legal consequences he faces." The public disowning by his own parents was the final blow to Marcus's reputation. Even his family had abandoned him publicly, choosing to support his victims rather than defend his actions. Patricia gathered our materials as the gallery slowly emptied, everyone processing what they'd witnessed. "How do you feel?" she asked as we walked toward the courthouse exit. "Like justice has a sense of theater," I replied. "He spent months trying to erase me from his life. And today, everyone who matters to him got to see exactly what kind of person he really is." Outside the courthouse, Marcus's former colleagues were already posting about the proceedings on social media. His parents sat in their car, probably calling family members to explain what they'd just witnessed. Brianna Chen and her mother drove away, having delivered the final evidence needed to ensure his conviction. The man who thought he could steal his way to a fresh start had instead created the most public possible exposure of his crimes, his character, and his complete moral failure. But this was just the beginning. The criminal conviction would follow, along with the civil judgment, the asset seizure, and the professional consequences that would follow him for the rest of his career. Marcus Caldwell had wanted freedom from responsibility.
Instead, he'd earned a lifetime of consequences that would remind him daily of the pregnant woman he'd tried to erase and the child he'd abandoned for 30 pieces of silver and a relationship built on lies. Justice had been served, but more importantly, it had been witnessed by everyone who needed to see what kind of man abandons a pregnant woman and steals money to fund his escape from responsibility. 3 months later, I stood in the nursery of my new apartment, painting the walls a soft yellow while my daughter kicked gently against my ribs. The eviction notice that had started this whole nightmare was now framed on my desk, not as a monument to trauma, but as a reminder of how far I'd come from that terrifying morning when my world collapsed. The apartment was nothing fancy, a 2-bedroom in a safe neighborhood with good schools and reasonable rent. But every piece of furniture, every baby item, every soft blanket had been purchased with money legally obtained through court-ordered restitution. Marcus's theft had inadvertently funded the very future he'd tried to escape. Patricia called while I was putting the finishing touches on the butterfly mobile that would hang above my daughter's crib. "Final settlement check cleared this morning," she announced with satisfaction. $37,416. Full restitution for the theft, plus damages for emotional distress, plus coverage of all legal fees and medical expenses. And the criminal case? Sentencing is next week. The prosecutor is recommending 18 months in state prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation with mandatory financial counseling and anger management. 18 months. It seemed both too little and too much. Too little for the systematic cruelty he'd inflicted, but too much time for my daughter to wait to meet a father who might never deserve the title. What about the corporate charges from Davidson Tech? Those are federal, so they'll run concurrently. Another 12 months, but he'll serve them at the same facility. The company recovered most of their stolen money through asset seizure and his parents' intervention. His parents. Janet and Robert Caldwell had surprised everyone by liquidating retirement savings to pay restitution to both me and Davidson Tech Solutions. Their letter, delivered through Patricia, had been heartbreaking in its sincerity and shame. "We raised him better than this," they'd written. "We don't know where we failed, but we won't let his victims suffer for our failure as parents. This baby is our grandchild, and we want to be part of their life if you'll allow it, even though we understand if you can't forgive our family name." The letter sat in my baby book now, the first entry in what I hoped would be a collection of people who chose to love this child regardless of her father's failures. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "Channel 7 is running the follow-up story tonight at 6. Want to watch it together?" The media attention had been surprisingly positive, focusing on the systematic nature of financial abuse during pregnancy and the importance of holding perpetrators accountable. My story had apparently inspired other women to come forward about similar experiences, leading to policy discussions about protecting pregnant women from economic abandonment. I'd given one carefully scripted interview, speaking not about revenge or personal satisfaction, but about the need for consequences when someone systematically victimizes vulnerable partners. The pregnancy center where I received prenatal care had asked me to speak at their support groups, sharing how legal advocacy could provide protection for other women facing similar betrayals. "I'll be there," I texted back to Rachel, "bringing pizza and ice cream. The baby wants both." At 6 p.m. sharp, Rachel and I settled onto her couch to watch Channel 7's investigative piece about pregnancy-related financial abuse. The segment opened with statistics that made my situation seem less unique than I'd hoped. Thousands of women annually faced economic abandonment by partners who couldn't handle the reality of impending parenthood. But the reporter, Jennifer Walsh, had done her homework on my specific case. 3 months ago, Marcus Caldwell seemed to have it all: a promising career in software development, a downtown apartment, and a new relationship with marketing coordinator Brianna Chen. What his girlfriend didn't know was that Caldwell had systematically stolen nearly $30,000 from his pregnant ex-girlfriend to fund their relationship. The screen showed the courthouse footage from Marcus's arrest.
his face clearly visible as he was led away in handcuffs while his former colleagues recorded everything. Today, Caldwell is serving 18 months in state prison for identity theft and financial abuse, while his victim has used court-ordered restitution to build a stable home for their daughter. Their daughter. The reporter had used present tense, acknowledging that my baby existed and deserved consideration regardless of her father's crimes.
Legal experts say cases like this highlight the need for stronger protections for pregnant women facing economic abandonment, particularly when identity theft is involved. The segment included interviews with Patricia discussing the legal precedents, with Davidson Tech Solutions General Counsel about corporate responsibility in employee fraud cases, and with domestic violence advocates about the particular vulnerability of pregnant women to financial abuse. But the most powerful moment came when they interviewed Dr. Sarah Martinez, the pregnancy counselor who had worked with other women in similar situations. What we see in cases like Selin Morrison's is that the abandonment isn't impulsive, Dr. Martinez explained. It's calculated. The perpetrator often begins planning their exit strategy while simultaneously increasing their control over the victim's finances, leaving them with no resources to resist or recover. The segment concluded with updated information about my situation: stable housing, ongoing prenatal care, and a support network that had grown to include not just family and friends, but Marcus's own parents and former girlfriend. Morrison declined our request for an on-camera interview, Jennifer Walsh concluded, but provided a statement saying she hopes her experience will encourage other women to seek legal protection when facing similar abandonment and theft. As the segment ended, I felt something I hadn't experienced throughout this entire ordeal: peace. Not satisfaction or vindication or revenge, just peace. The truth had been told, consequences had been faced, and my daughter would be born into a world where her father's actions had been acknowledged and addressed. Rachel turned off the TV and studied my face. "How do you feel seeing it all laid out like that?" "Proud," I said, surprising myself. Not proud of what happened to me, but proud of how I handled it. Proud that I didn't just accept being victimized. Proud that I fought back legally and ethically instead of just suffering in silence. And Marcus? I thought about that question as my daughter performed what felt like a gymnastics routine against my ribcage. I feel sorry for him, honestly. He threw away everything real for something built on lies and theft. He'll be in prison when his daughter is born, in supervised visitation when she takes her first steps, probably still paying restitution when she starts school. Do you think he's learned anything from this? I think he's learned that actions have consequences. Whether he's learned anything deeper than that, I guess we'll find out when he gets out. The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. Through the peephole, I saw an older couple I recognized from courthouse proceedings, Marcus's parents, holding flowers and what appeared to be a baby gift. "Mrs. Morrison?" Janet Caldwell's voice was tentative when I opened the door. "We hope you don't mind us stopping by. We wanted to check on you and bring something for our granddaughter." Robert Caldwell stood behind his wife, holding a handcrafted wooden cradle that was clearly a labor of love. "We understand if you're not ready for us to be part of the baby's life," he said quietly. "We know our son hurt you terribly, and we can't undo that, but we'd like to be the grandparents this child deserves, if you'll let us try." I looked at these two people who had raised a son capable of systematic cruelty, but who had chosen to support their victims rather than enable his behavior. They'd liquidated retirement savings to pay for his crimes, publicly disowned his actions, and now stood on my doorstep asking for the privilege of loving a grandchild their son had tried to erase. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "I think my daughter should know her grandparents." Over coffee and Rachel's famous chocolate chip cookies, Janet and Robert Caldwell told me about the son they thought they'd raised versus the man who had systematically victimized me. "We keep asking ourselves where we went wrong," Janet said, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug like it could provide warmth for the cold shame she carried. "He was such a sweet little boy, helpful, considerate, always thinking about others." "When did that change?" I asked, genuinely curious.
Robert considered the question carefully. Looking back, I think it was when things started coming easily to him. Good grades without studying, scholarships without effort, jobs without struggling. He began to believe he was entitled to whatever he wanted without paying the price for it. He learned to manipulate situations to his advantage instead of earning things honestly. Janet added, "We should have seen it earlier, should have corrected it before it became this destructive pattern." "You can't blame yourselves for his adult choices," I said, meaning it. "He made conscious decisions to commit crimes and hurt people. That's on him, not on your parenting." "But we raised him," Robert replied, "and now our granddaughter will grow up knowing her father is in prison for stealing from her. That's a burden she'll carry because of our family name." "No," I said firmly. "She'll grow up knowing her mother fought for what was right and won. She'll know her grandparents chose justice over family loyalty. She'll learn that people can rise above their circumstances and their genetics." As the evening progressed, we made tentative plans for the future. Regular visits after the baby arrived, help with childcare when I returned to work, college fund contributions that would give my daughter opportunities her father's crimes had threatened to steal. Most importantly, they committed to complete transparency about Marcus's situation and choices as she grew older. No family myths or protective lies, just age-appropriate truth about consequences and character. After they left, Rachel and I sat in comfortable silence, processing how much had changed since that terrifying eviction notice 3 months ago. "You know what the best part is?" Rachel said finally. "What?" "Marcus spent months planning to erase you and the baby from his life. Instead, his crimes brought more people into her world who love her. His parents, his ex-girlfriend's family offering support, the legal team who fought for you, even his former colleagues who've reached out with job opportunities." She was right. Marcus's attempts to erase us had instead expanded our community, creating a network of people invested in my daughter's well-being and committed to ensuring she never felt abandoned or unsupported.
My phone buzzed with an email from Patricia. Criminal sentencing finalized. 18 months prison, 3 years supervised probation, mandatory restitution payments of $847 monthly for 5 years. Family court hearings scheduled for next month regarding parental rights and visitation terms post-incarceration. 18 months from now, Marcus would be released and would have to rebuild his life from nothing while paying monthly restitution to the daughter he'd tried to pretend didn't exist. He'd lost his career, his reputation, his relationship, his apartment, and his freedom. But most importantly, he'd lost the right to define the narrative about what kind of father he was. That narrative would be written by his actions going forward, whether he took responsibility for his crimes, completed his court-ordered counseling, paid his restitution faithfully, and earned the privilege of being part of his daughter's life. As I prepared for bed that night, I stood in my daughter's completed nursery, surrounded by furniture purchased with restitution money, looking at photos from the ultrasound appointment Marcus had fled from. The same ultrasound photo that had started his digital erasure campaign now sat in a beautiful frame, the first image in what would become a lifetime of memories. I placed my hand on my belly, feeling my daughter's movement in response to my touch. "Your daddy made some very bad choices," I whispered to her, "but those choices led to consequences that made you safer, made us stronger, and surrounded you with people who will love you unconditionally." She kicked in response as if she understood that she was wanted, planned for, and protected. Marcus Caldwell had tried to escape responsibility through theft and abandonment. Instead, he'd created a fortress of accountability that would follow him for the rest of his life. Every monthly restitution payment would remind him of the daughter he'd tried to erase. Every supervised visit would demonstrate the trust he'd have to earn back. Every job application would require explaining his criminal record to potential employers. But for me and my daughter, his crimes had become the foundation of our security. The restitution payments would fund her education, the legal precedents established by our case would protect other women, the community that had rallied around us would provide love and support for years to come. Justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about restoration, protection, and ensuring that victims could rebuild their lives stronger than before. Marcus had stolen money, but the courts had returned safety, stability, and hope for the future. As I turned off the nursery light and headed to bed,
I thought about the eviction notice that had started this journey, framed on my desk as a reminder of how far we'd come. Tomorrow I'd wake up in an apartment I could afford, carrying a daughter who was wanted and loved, surrounded by people who had chosen to stand with truth over comfort. That was the real victory. Not Marcus's imprisonment or public humiliation, but the life we'd built from the ashes of his betrayal. A life he'd inadvertently made possible by stealing money that became restitution, creating chaos that became clarity, and abandoning responsibilities that became opportunities for others to step up and love unconditionally. Marcus Caldwell had gotten exactly what he'd always wanted: freedom from the responsibility of being a father. But freedom, as he was learning in his prison cell, isn't the same thing as escape. Some consequences follow you no matter how far you run, and some debts can only be paid through acknowledging the harm you've caused and spending the rest of your life trying to make amends. For the first time since finding that eviction notice, I fell asleep without anger, without fear, and without wondering what would happen next. Justice had been served, security had been restored, and my daughter would be born into a world where her father's failures had become the foundation of her strength. That was the cleanest resolution of all. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.